Welcome to But What About Me, a career success podcast dedicated to giving a voice to underrepresented populations, or UPs, and helping each navigate their career to reach their highest potential. This podcast is brought to you by JenniferTardy.com. Hey guys, Jennifer Tardy here, and welcome back to another episode of But What About Me, where I am your career success coach. And in today's episode, we are talking all about career development for people of color. It was so awesome talking to Gregory on this podcast episode. Now, he and I had a chance to meet through a mutual acquaintance. And I'm thinking to myself, where have you been, Greg? Where has this conversation been? Because I thoroughly enjoyed it. So one of the first things that we realized is that we share many things in common, including the love of talking about controversial topics. And so when we went through our brainstorming, trying to figure out exactly what we wanted to talk about today, we had a list of things. But what really stood out to us is the definite need to speak to people of color about career development, because we both know and we both agree that the process just looks a little different. So we talked about things like what it means to have an expiration date on a career or job and the penalties of not being so forward thinking. We talk about the importance of relationships as we're planning our career path. Greg even talks about the importance of getting close to decision makers, and instead of spinning our wheels talking to other people who aren't making these decisions related to the career. And we even dive into the difference between a good versus a right opportunity as you are considering your next job, among so many other topics. You'll notice, and I have to apologize in advance, I keep diverting the conversation because Greg has a tendency of throwing out these bombshell nuggets and then moving on. And so I'm like, no, Greg, I want you to unpack that, because that was a major point that you just made. I guess he's just extremely good at this. So let me introduce you to Gregory Hall. Now, Gregory Hall is a high energy speaker and facilitator who helps people become better communicators and companies become better workplaces. And so after spending 15 years helping high growth organizations acquire and develop diverse talent and build top workplaces, Greg now designs and facilitates interactive learning experiences that teach participants how to communicate with employees, peers, customers, investors, and other external stakeholders in the most compelling way. Greg holds an MBA from the Morris Graduate School of Management and a bachelor's degree. Greg is an avid reader and walker, a public radio junkie, a shameless abuser of Post-it easel pads, which, as a side note, we both share that in common. And you'll even see in the video, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, you'll see his giant Post-it stickers behind him. And also Greg is someone who absolutely insists on having a chocolate chip cookie every single day. He is so awesome. If you love today's podcast and you feel that someone else needs to hear it, please take a screenshot and tag me at Jen Tardy. Don't forget to leave a comment. Okay, let's get started. Well, welcome, Greg. I'm so excited that you are on our But What About Me podcast today. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. And I was just telling you a second ago how excited I am about today's topic, because we are talking about career development for people of color. And we went through some brainstorming activities and we were like, no, let's do this, because we don't want people to miss opportunities.
Yeah.
So let's kind of jump right into it. And tell me what you believe to be some of those critical activities that go into career development planning.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a few things. So I think one is certainly making sure you're very intentional about everything you do. So just having a plan and thinking about what direction you want your career to go in and how you're going to get there. I think it starts there. But then I kind of think about it as kind of having three buckets to it. So on bucket number one, you have your credentials, and that is your education, that is certifications. That's kind of all the things you get on paper that really helps validate, what you've learned, what you've acquired to the rest of the world. The second bucket I think about is your experiences. So that's actually the stuff that you do, the projects you take on, the assignments you take on that actually give you the experience, the know-how, the actual skills to perform in whatever it is you want to do after what you're doing right now. And the third one I think often gets overlooked is actually relationship building. So part of, moving forward in your career, starting a business, being successful in anything really involves not just what you do, but also who you're connected to and how you can use those relationships and benefit from them to kind of move your own agenda forward. So a big part of, I'd say, career development that people do not think a lot about is actually making networks both inside your current organization as well as, networking very aggressively outside. So I think those are kind of the three buckets I generally think about when I think about career development.
And thank you for sharing that. I cannot wait until we unpack these because you've said a lot of great things. You were talking about intentionality and you were talking about relationships, which is a thing that many of us miss. But before we even unpack those, can we talk a little bit about career development and it being different for people of color? Or is it different? Am I just making that up?
No, you are not. Yes, Lord, it's different.
Okay, so yes, how is it different?
So, and I think that's a great question, and it's also one that has a lot of deep history behind it. So I'd like to take some time and just kind of unpack some of that right now, because I think that particularly now this conversation is coming up a lot more, as it seems like in the past few years in particular, lots of organizations are really trying to be, which is great, a lot more intentional about, diversity and inclusion, equity. But I think we have to think about two things that really have a deep and resonating impact in this space. So one is whether people want to talk about it or not. The truth of the matter is our nation has a very long and deep history of intentional exclusion. We're talking about from access to healthcare, to access to education, to access to the job market and places of employment. So to put that in perspective, the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. And even though my family has been in this country for hundreds of years, I am the first person who was born with full rights. And that puts things in perspective when you think about it that way. So we historically have not had the same access to education opportunities to move into higher roles. And we also don't even have the same access to opportunities in and of themselves, right? So people of color have not generally had, equal access to the workforce and to organizations for a long history in our nation. So that's one part. And that kind of sets the stage for, when you get into your job, where you can get in. That also leans into then when I talk about relationships, talks about who you are already connected to, what kind of people you already have in your network by virtue of that reality. So that's one part. The second thing I think brings things forward to, current day is there's been a lot of conversation around implicit bias. So even though we're now at a stage where on paper, we've kind of codified that, we're trying to bring about equality in the workforce and access to education, all that kind of good stuff, there still remains this implicit bias that we all carry around. So even now, as being people of color, working in the workforce, in this current day, still when it comes to who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets sponsored, who gets mentored, all those things are still impacted by this implicit bias that exists in all of us. So even though we're now present more in the workplace, still the opportunities are different. They're limited in some ways, and those relationships are limited in some ways as well, based on this implicit bias that is really widespread. And everyone has, right? People of color have it too. But the other part of that is you think about now who is in the majority in organizations, and also who holds the power in organizations. So all those things, have a really profound impact on, as people of color, our access and success inside the workforce.
Wow. So I like how you said that. You're like, so my question was, how is it different? And you're like, because we have all of these hurdles. And I love that you went back to
historical things that have created hurdles for us today, or just landmines or things that we have to continue to navigate.
Mhm.
So going back to those three buckets that you were talking about, can you unpack a little bit of why it's so important to be intentional? Let me even rephrase the question. Most people who've been unintentional,
Mhm.
how has that negatively affected them?
There's a lot of stories around that. So I live in Chicago, and so quite frequently I'm going downtown Chicago, and I come out of Union Station. It's really interesting because you get on this train and you find yourself unboarding with hundreds of people at the same time. You're all walking along this 12-foot wide platform trying to get into Union Station. But I remember about a year ago, there's this billboard that caught my attention. It was put up by one of the colleges around here, and the billboard read something like this. It said, "You're going to your job every day, but where is your job going?"
Oh, that is deep.
Right?
Where is your job going?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I had the same reaction. So, I mean, you think about the context. So every day, as people are getting off this train, right, moving in the rat pack, going to work, you pass by this billboard, and you kind of internally ask yourself that question, and you say, yeah, where are things going? And I think that without that intentionality, I tell people this all the time. I say that no matter who you are, there's only three ways out of your current job. One is death, which most people don't want to go out that way. You don't want to die sitting in your chair.
No. Right.
The second way is, involuntary movement. So that means you are terminated, you are laid off. Hey, sometimes even promoted, right? You're like, yeah, great, it's great, I got the promotion, but I didn't really want it. I like the job I'm doing. I like being an individual contributor. And now you're saying manage this team. I count that as involuntary movement. And that last thing then is voluntary movement. So that means, okay, I know in all reality, I'm probably not going to work at this place for the next 30 or 40 years and retire with a gold watch. So that means there's some kind of an expiration date on this relationship. And even if I'm not thinking about it, somebody else is. That could be my manager. That could be my boss's boss. That could be someone sitting in finance that says, hey, we need to reduce headcount next year. So someone is thinking about this with intentionality. And it might as well be me too. So when I talk about the importance of that, it really is thinking about you're not going to be in your current role forever. So if there's an expiration date, what that means is you want to start preparing now for what happens next. So you don't find yourself, as I think is the alternative often is, in a place of desperation.
Yeah.
Because when we're desperate, we make rushed and we make fundamentally, I think, more times not bad decisions. So it's one thing to be looking for a job when you're like, I like my job right now. It's cool. I like my manager. I like my coworkers. I'm compensated fairly. This is fantastic. And be looking for a job in that state of mind versus being in the state of mind where, my boss is horrible. I'm underpaid. I'm overstressed. And then looking for a job while you're in that frame of mind, right? Because then the first thing comes along, it's just a little bit better. You say it's not perfect, but it's better than right now. And we'll look at that opportunity under other circumstances we completely pass on. So I think it's so important that we always have been thinking about, okay, I'm happy right now, but what's the next step? And what do I start doing right now so that I can be positioned to be successful in that next step?
So, Greg, somebody's going to be listening to this, and I know that they will. They're going to say, what the hell? Somebody is thinking about the expiration date on my job.
They are right now. They have a spreadsheet out, and your name hopefully is not in the first 10 rows, but, it might be someplace in there, right?
But that is a real conversation because most employees, unless because you have an HR background, I have an HR background, so we know what happens behind closed doors.
Yes.
And we know that leaders are constantly thinking about who do we need to bring in, who may be potentially leaving, what positions do we no longer need? How does this headcount connect to budget?
Yeah.
They're always talking about performance. They're always talking about succession planning. These leaders are constantly talking, and you're actually even making me think about like how severe, or nope, that's not the right word, how urgent it is to truly understand
Yeah.
that people are planning the expiration date for these roles.
Yeah.
And so I do want to emphasize that is an excellent point, that you may as well be just as intentional about your own expiration date as others are, because conversations are happening we need to do a whole podcast just on the fact of what conversations are happening behind closed
We
doors.
should.
Yes.
There's a lot of conversations happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
Exactly.
if you don't know about those things, right, the danger is you're kind of going along and we become complacent, right? We say, well, things are okay right now, they're not perfect. And we have this presumption that this job will be here for as long as I want it to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more than ever, we know it's simply not the case. And I can think of examples of both, organizations that have done, have had a very hard time financially and really struggled with their performance. They've had to lay off people, but there's just as many examples of organizations that, are, doing great financially. And I'm not going to name names here because I'm not trying to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can think of one publicly traded company that they had their annual report come out and they exceeded expectations. They had their best performance ever. In the history of their organization. They've been around for over 100 years. So you're thinking, this is great. They're, doing great. They're, they're making money. They're having great returns. Exactly maybe 20 or 30 days later, they announced they're laying off a quarter of their corporate staff. And you think, well, wait a minute. You just said that you had the best performance ever. So your response is to then let all these people go that gave you the best. So even if you're thinking, well, no, my organization's doing great, the economy's doing great, doesn't matter. The reality is that your role can disappear anytime. So you have to be prepared for it.
I've had just along those lines, I've had two people within my network, both of them leaders, two different companies, have a conversation with me about how, they were talking with, their peers and even their managers, they're all in leadership, about the numbers and how the numbers are saying that, the company is doing great. But then those same managers come back to them and say, you need to cut some people in your team. And they're both like, what? Like, what are you talking about? You just told me everything is going great here. And now all of a sudden we have to let people go. And so if you don't take the realm, if you don't get behind that wheel and be more intentional about your own career, then you're right. You may get into a place where you're struggling to get to that next job and maybe not making the best decisions for yourself. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I just add one more thing that just came to mind? So I think the other thing comes into play, specifically for people of color now. So, I mean, that can impact everyone. But, of course, the data tells us that, for people of color, we, by and large, have less wealth as compared to our white counterparts. So what that also means is that, when we are facing a situation where we are unexpectedly out of work, statistically speaking, we are less financially prepared to kind of, make it through that time period. So I think it kind of speaks to, again, all the more importantly that, we're focused as people of color around always, doing everything we can to stay prepared, to be ready, and to always be thinking forward about, okay, what's next? So I just wanted to add that in.
No, that's perfect, because it's a whole additional dimension of thinking about this too. So, I want to go back to your 3 buckets, right? So we talked about how career development, it's a focus on your credentials, it's a focus on your experience, it's a focus on relationships. Can we talk about, let's unpack those and talk about the actions? Eventually, I'm going to ask you about some hurdles specifically around relationships. Because I can't wait to get there. But let's talk about, what do you mean? What actions, as I'm thinking about my credentials, for example, do I need to be thinking about for career development?
So I'm always a firm believer in kind of thinking about, first where you want to end up. So and simply and kind of put it in just very technical terms, I would say that at any point in your career, always be looking at, job descriptions, job postings for the next role you want to go into. Right. And that becomes your roadmap for what you need to be doing right now to get there. So as you're looking at those postings, those descriptions, you're going to see, well, this requires a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, it requires this certification or, that certification. So if you don't have those things already, Well, kind of now's the time to start working towards that. And some of those things can be done in less time than others. So a certification you might be able to complete with, a online course and go sit for your test and take it, and you might be done in a couple of months, right? Whereas something like if you need a master's degree, that's obviously going to be a little bit more of an investment, both of time and money. So you'll want to kind of start as early as you can to make sure you're on pace to finish at the point you'll need to be done by. So when I talk about credentials, it's really kind of all those things that you might need on paper, certifications, degrees, whatever, to position you for the move you want to make next. When it comes to experience, that is actually, kind of the skill set and the actual experiences themselves you'll need to move next into that role. So if you look at your dream job, if you will, and it says need 3 to 5 years experience doing this, and you're like, well, I don't have that right now. Well, then the plan is, well, how do I get there? So a couple things, certainly there's these things called stretch assignments. And that's essentially, where you go to your manager and say, I know I have my current job doing right now, and I have every intention to keep on doing that and killing it while I'm doing it, by the way. However, there are also some new skills I'm interested in building, some new experiences I'm interested in getting. So here's my proposal. Here's what I would like to do to kind of start to give myself experience in those areas. So that's one way, is to think about, to ask about stretch assignments, participating in, if your organization offers them, leadership development programs that are kind of geared towards helping people get more specific experiences to hone their skills. And then, as much as time allows, and some of the stuff that, is not necessarily accessible right away, but I mean, even if it requires, to get the experience you need, picking up a part-time job or doing a side hustle, or even your volunteer experiences, whatever it takes to get that experience you need, to be really open and thoughtful about that. And that's kind of the big thing I encourage people to think about, is not solely think about, well, it has to be in, a full-time job capacity, but think about where are all the ways and all the different avenues that I might be able to get the kind of experiences that I'll need going forward. And that last one, when it comes to networking, the technical side of that is really just having, quite honestly, a regular cadence with which you are reaching out to people and connecting with them. So I almost hate saying the word networking, because that makes it sound so transactional, like you have this purpose in mind you're trying to angle for at all times. And I'd much rather just have us be in this place where we're constantly keeping people involved in conversation around, hey, what are you working on? Here's what I'm working on, and just kind of keeping those things going. So having lunch with people, quite honestly, it's that simple. Having lunch with people inside your organization, and again, outside your organization. As you're working on projects and different things, kind of bring people into conversation about those, not because you're trying to angle for a promotion, but it's saying, hey, I'm working on something really cool right now that I think you think is pretty cool too. Here's what I'm working on. And that is a couple of things. One, that kind of keeps the relationship fresh and active, but also when you start thinking about doing that with your leaders, it's kind of your way to self-promote on a regular basis around the things you're doing, and kind of keeping yourself top of mind as you are working on some of those higher level things. So just regularly finding a way to reach out, to connect with people, both inside and, very importantly, outside your organization. And I think that's even the bigger thing. So often we kind of get into a role and we feel really safe, and we're very well networked inside our roles, inside our organizations rather. But I think we need to be just as mindful about thinking about, okay, well, if something does happen here, and God forbid, the entire team is let go. Well, we're all leaving together now. If we're the only connections we have, that gives us a whole lot of branches outside of that. So being thoughtful around taking time to join a professional organization in your field, attending events related to that, attend conferences, be it the one-off half-day conference or the full-blown 3 or 4 day experience they have every single year, whatever it is. Finding ways to kind of get involved and stay connected that way too.
Okay. So thank you for unpacking that. And can I share something with you?
You can.
Because it's something that I started doing later in my career, but it was a very, very bold move. And I want to hear your thoughts on it as we start talking about career development for people of color. Okay. So one of the things that I started doing was sitting back and asking myself, what does success look like at this company? Whatever company I was in, what does success look like? And and I had to be very, very honest with myself. There was one organization in particular where success looked like an older white woman, established.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I had to think to myself, who in this company meets that description and would be a great person to add to my network and to really talk to them, right? Because in many companies, it's established white men, right? Yep. But in this company, it was a little bit different. Women were more in those higher leadership roles and things of that nature. So I found someone who happened to be the CFO of the organization, and I asked her to mentor me.
Yeah.
That can seem very uncomfortable for a lot of people. It can seem very controversial for a lot of people to even think about relationships in that manner. Yeah. What do you think?
I am all in for that, and I'll tell you why. Because whether people, and it's one of those areas I think that it's the reality of kind of how things really work inside organizations, but it's never really written about. You won't find this in any organization's policy guide. They won't tell you this, but here's what happens when they're kind of looking for talent and thinking about who are we going to move into leadership roles? Who are we going to keep around? Who do we see as really being high potential? Yes, they always have a process, right, where you can apply internally, you can submit your resume via their system or what have you, and all those things come into play. But then there's this other layer, right, in which kind of the powers that be have these conversations, sometimes formally and sometimes informally. It's kind of in passing, and they say, "Hey, you know what? Do you know what Jennifer's doing over there in the accounting? Like, yeah, she's killing it." And it's that conversation that really starts to guide and influence what decisions are made when it comes to succession planning and hiring inside the organization. So the closer you can be to those decision makers, the better it is for you for a number of reasons. But I think that's one part of it. I think the other part is there's just so much wisdom to gain there, and I think that once you kind of get behind the curtain, if you will, and you're having those conversations, there's such a rich learning opportunity there. And it's been said many times before, we don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
And when you have a chance to sit down and have a conversation with someone, particularly at a senior level, there's just so much insight they can share with you based on their own experiences, even their own opinions that are going to be so valuable for you and really help you put things into context. Another reason I'm a big fan of that is I think we have to be very honest with ourselves and kind of come back to the idea of the expiration date. And then at some point we have to figure out if I am in the right place, right? So meaning I can be very successful in a role inside an organization, but that does not mean that it is the right place for me. And I think we have to be thoughtful around this notion of a good opportunity versus the right opportunity. And those are often used, kind of synonymously, but I think they're very different things. An opportunity can be a good opportunity, but not be the right opportunity for us as individuals. So I think part of how we figure that out is when we start having these conversations with, these mentors and higher level people inside the organization, we get a much better sense of, kind of the deep ethos of the organization, right? And the grounding of it and kind of what direction they're going. And we have those conversations, we say, does that sound like where I want to go too? Or does that sound like, no, that's a completely different direction? So I'm a big fan of making those asks. And I think that the worst that can happen is they say no.
That is true. That is true.
So what?
And you know what? You are throwing out so many good nuggets, and you have so many of them, and you're moving straight to the next one that I have to go back and just reemphasize a beautiful nugget that you just said. And I'm putting it back in my own words too, because I may not get every word right. Career development means getting close to decision makers. And I have seen it time and time and time again where employees, specifically people of color, are talking to a lot of people about what they want to do, but not the right people.
Yes.
And not the decision makers that can actually do something for them. But then when it comes time to talk to a person that is the decision maker, then that can seem extremely intimidating.
Yes.
Which goes back to that point. And I'm so glad that you called it out, because I completely forgot that was yet another one of the reasons why I went directly to the CFO to build a relationship with her. She is a decision maker. And when she opens her mouth, people listen.
Yes.
And so I love that you said that career development is really, it's also about getting close to decision makers. That's a part of relationships too. And thank you for talking about the good versus the right opportunity. How do some people get mixed up in understanding good versus the right opportunity?
That
Like
money.
oh, that is that is a major point. Okay,
No,
let's unpack that for a second,
no, yeah.
because that is a major point. So you can get caught up. The money can be distracting.
It can be so
Take it
distracting,
away.
right? No,
Yeah.
that's real. I used to say I can never ever be bought, but I can be leased. Okay, right? Yeah, you know that's so true. Like sometimes you kind of having a conversation with an employer, and you're kind of like it's okay. You feel pretty. You feel it's fine, right? And then they say the starting salary is this. You're like, whoa, well, wait a minute, it's moved up a couple of notches, right? So that's real, and that's another reason why I think it's so important. To the point you made earlier, thinking about what does success look like for you, and to think about those things before you even start getting into conversations around salary and really have a clear sense of what's important to me. Because here's what happens. We're in a position where, someone's, dangling a salary in front of you. The emotions kick in then, right? You start thinking, oh, wow, I can get that new car now and, all this stuff, right? And again, you start getting away from good, solid, long-term thinking and making sure that your decision aligns to what you ultimately value as a person, as a professional. So I think there's a lot to, it's salary, it's benefit, it's things like, proximity to home. And I think those are all important things to think about. But before, again, you're in a position where you're faced with a decision. So I think the best thing to do is if you want to make sure you make the right decision for yourself as opposed to a good decision, which again, they can be fine. Sometimes you end in some good places that might not be the right place long-term. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I think it's to be thinking about that as much as possible before you are faced with a decision. So, have okay, here is the salary range that I desire, but here's what I absolutely need to have. So you're not kind of, still mentally processing that as things are happening. You kind of know what your number is. You can go in very confident with that. You have a sense of, is it super important to me to have a position where I'm close to home for whatever reason, or I'm okay, commuting an hour each way. So start to think through some of those things before you're faced with decisions, so that that's not stuff you're kind of still cycling through. Right. We should really just be thinking about the opportunity, and again, if it positions you for, what you ultimately want to do, and if it truly aligns to your values, both as a person and as a professional.
Okay. So I am going to make a bold statement.
Oh, I love bold statements.
A little controversial.
Okay.
And then I'm going to explain my thinking behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear some thoughts from you. So here's my bold statement. I think that many, not all, many people of color aren't thinking forward about their career. Okay. That is my bold statement, which is what's causing us to fall behind. Now, here's some of the context behind it. I love reading statistics, specifically about people of color, even more so when it's talking about Black women, because me being a Black woman. And one of the documents that I was reading was talking about how when it comes to a Black woman, in this example, we are typically the head of our own household. We are single mothers. We also have additional extended relatives living in our home that we're caring for. We're also the ones that are caring for our aging parents. We're also the ones that are in our churches that are volunteering there, that are volunteering in the community. We are also, the main point of contact at work, heads down. We are busy.
Yes.
And now on top of all of this, I am hearing you say that now you want me to plan out my career.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm not saying that. I'm saying someone else said that. I've heard them say it.
So I mean, can you talk about that a little bit about why it can be such a hurdle? To get ahead of your career.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I want to be very clear that I'm in no way trying to be prescriptive for what Black women should be doing. I'm not
No pressure. No pressure.
No pressure at all. No, but it's true because I mean, I can, from my own experience, I've seen my mother work obviously extremely, extremely hard. And now, my daughter's mother, I see how hard she works. And I mean, it's real, right? It's completely real. And so a couple of things I think about. So one, I think that part of it is, giving yourself license. And I want to say that phrase very specific, license to be selfish. And I bring it up because I think that so often, and I really struggle with this personally too. I think so often selfish has such a negative connotation. It's bad. You shouldn't do it. You should always be, outwardly giving and, be a good steward of your resources and time, which is all true. I think those things are all true. But I think part of being selfish is also self-care. And I think oftentimes, particularly women of color, spend a lot of time investing in others, supporting others, which is fantastic. And that's what let's keep it real, that's what makes this world, that's what makes every community work, right? But I think there's also important to take license. So, you know what, I have to take some time for myself too. I've got to take some time for myself because in order for me to, even if I want to bring it back to, if I want to bring it full circle back to service, the only way I can continue to be successful as a contributor to my household and, caring for aging parents and raising children and all these things is if I am, myself healthy and, and able and capable and have the resources to do those things. So, I want to keep doing those things, but part of that is in order to do that, I'm going to need to have, resources to be able to engage in that. So I think part of that is, giving themselves a license to say, hey, I need some time for me. It might not be a lot. I'm not going to be able to, take 3 weeks off and say, I'm going to Bermuda for 3 weeks. But if that is 10 minutes a day, if that is 10 minutes a week, whatever that is, whatever you can do, just find a way to shave off a little bit of time for yourself. And I'll tell you a quick story that I think really put things in perspective for me. I think that we all get to a certain point in life and we feel like, we just don't have a lot of time. And I think we're right for the most part. There's always something we can and should be doing, right? But a few years ago, I was trying to sell my home. I'd already moved from the home. I lived about an hour away or so. And I was trying to sell the home. It was just like more than a few years, over 10 years ago. Yeah, because it was the housing market was really bad. Anyways, so there was like no activity happening. I was, working full time at the time. I was in graduate school, so I had a full plate and everything. The house is an hour away, so I drive there every week to kind of go do a walkthrough. And I remember this during the holiday period. I just didn't do a walkthrough 1 week. I'm like, what could go wrong? And being in Chicagoland, a lot can go wrong. So we had one of those puller vortex thingamajiggers, and a pipe actually froze and burst. And it was funny because, I remember I was at work and I got a call from my real estate agent saying that, someone had, come to see the house and they really like it and everything. And I'm all excited. Yes, we're going to find us a house around the holidays. Like, awesome. And she said, but when I went in there in one of the rooms, there was standing water on the floor. I was like, that's impossible. Because it was the great room. It was a pretty big room, like, 600 square feet. I'm like, there is no way there is standing water. Yeah. I'm like, this has to be an exaggeration. And I was so desperate at that point. I was like, but are they still interested in the house?
Right. Most importantly, are they still wanting to buy my house?
Even though they had the water, they like, we can clean this up though. So, so make a long story short, a pipe burst and had been spraying water into the house for, I don't know, God knows how long. And it just, there was mold growing on the ceilings. It was funky. But here's what happened. So I spent the next, as you can imagine, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 weeks on and off the phone with the insurance company, with contractors, going in for visits, doing walkthroughs. I mean, hours, maybe 10 or 20 hours per week dealing with this house situation. We're trying to get things back in order, right? And that went on for 3 or 4 weeks. Now, here's the thing here's what I'm working towards. Had you asked me before all that happened, Greg, you need to think about your professional development right now. And we have this program where it's going to take 10 or 12 hours of your time for the next 4 weeks to invest in your development to make sure you're ready for this next thing you have happening. I would have said, absolutely not. I'm working full time. I'm in graduate school. I would say absolutely not. But then a crisis struck, and guess what? Yeah. I had to still work full time, still go to grad schools, and also integrate this other unexpected stuff into my life. So I tell that story because I think so often the place that we often live in, particularly as people of color, is that we are constantly, and we're great at it, right? We have lots of experience. We are constantly, though, responding to and working in a crisis situation, right? So something's gone wrong, and now we find ourselves responding. And we are putting in a large amount of time while we're still keeping everything. So the household's still running, kids are still, doing great. We're still working. We're still doing everything we need to do. But then we also have, on top of that, something really big that we're kind of dealing with. So my thought is we're great at doing that, and we balance that successfully. So the next time we kind of have that downtime, right? If there ever is any, why not say, no, I don't have any time. Yes, I have children, I have parents, I have community commitments, I have church, I have all these things going on. But if a crisis came up right now, I'd have to make the time to deal with it. So I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to put in an hour, even though I don't have it, right? Even though I don't have it, I'm going to put in an hour for myself for this right now, or 2 hours, or whatever it is. And I think that sometimes we have to be able to find peace with imperfection. So in a perfect world, it'd be great if I can go and, take 3 days away from work and go to that full, 3-day conference and do that kind of professional development. But maybe I can't. Maybe for me, I can go to, online to Coursera.com, and I can take an online course, in no more than 15 minutes at a time per night. Maybe that's what I can do. And if that's what I can do, then that'll be my thing until the next thing comes along. So I think it's giving license to be selfish, but then also, again, kind of having peace with that imperfection sometimes. I know it's a very long answer.
No. That story was great because I wasn't even thinking that was where you were headed with it. And so it's almost like if a crisis were to happen, you'd be able to make a priority to fix that crisis.
Yeah.
So begin thinking about, like, if a crisis were to happen today, what would you reprioritize to make that work? Well, then reprioritize that now.
Yeah.
And it even made me think about the first time I was on a plane. And it blew my mind. When they give that safety speech and they're like, put your mask on first before you put someone else's mask on. I was like, what? Who would tell somebody that? But that's what this situation is about too. Career development, especially, when you have a million things going on, in order to save or to help or to support the massive amounts of people that you're trying to save and help and support, you've got to save and help and support yourself first.
Yes.
So you've got to put your own mask on too. Excellent. Okay. Where's the time going? Time is just...
I'm a talker.
And I have so many additions. We may have to do a part 2, but for the sake of my juiciest questions next.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. So let me actually go back to an earlier question, and this will be the last question that I ask you before we begin to wrap things up. Okay. But let's talk about moments where some people may wake up, they actually wake up in their own career. And what I found in talking to previous clients is that it's the moment where you may have been talking to your boss, and your boss said, you're not quite ready for this next level yet.
Yeah.
And but then when you get the announcement of who did get that position, one of your peers, and you're like, wait, they're not as qualified as me. How do you reconcile a thing like that? Why would something like this happen?
Yeah.
Is that career planning going the opposite way, or good for them? Or
I honestly, I think part of it is, so, and I've faced this my own self. So I think that there's a couple ways that can play out. So one, I always try to, I think you can, one of two ways you can say, well, one, it's very upsetting, obviously, right? So you're like, hey, what's going on? Because it's one thing to not, get the role yourself. I think we can kind of, we can stomach that. Like, okay, for whatever reason, I didn't get it. But then on top of that, when you see someone else get it and you're like, really?
Wait a minute. I know your work ethic.
Yeah, right. You're like why does that? Don't put anyone in there if that's the case. Right. I mean, seriously, you take a step backwards now. I'm personally offended by that. So,
correct.
I think that there's a certain amount of professional hurt that we deal with, right? And I think this is kind of the reality and the hurt of being a person of color in everyday life and all the things, the microaggressions, I mean, all that. But then on top of that, I think we also have professional hurt through things like that, where we've done everything that's been asked of us. I've all those buckets I mentioned earlier, the credentials, the experiences, the rate, you've done all that stuff, right? You've done it consistently, you've done above and beyond your peers, and yet and still, you feel like someone at the decision-making level is kind of saying, well, you came up short, or not your time yet, or that kind of thing. So there's some hurt involved with that. And, one thing I'd say is to always ask yourself the question is this something that I am going to live through and go back and, try it again inside this organization? Or is this indicative of a larger systemic issue that I may or may not be signing on to battle with? So what I often tell people is sometimes you go in and, among, for instance, well, they don't want to hire any black people there, and they say, I say, stop right there. I say, stop right there. So if they don't want to hire any black people there, that could very well be true. But is that then the organization that you want to be a part of?
That's right.
Because if they're fighting you, even in the application process, I mean, and you certainly can, if you want to be the person who's going to, to integrate the organization, and you want to take that on, that's fine. But you have to realize what you're signing up for and say, I recognize that, and that's what I'm here to do. This is something I'm doing this larger than me in my career, and that's a fine decision. But if it's strictly because you want the job and you're thinking that once I get hired, once I kind of force my way in there, then things are going to miraculously change. I don't think that's realistic. So when those things happen, the first thing I say is pause and do a quick gut check and say, how do I not cognitively, but in the heart, right? How do I feel about this? And does this impact, my thought around the organization? Is this something where I am going to kind of emotionally be able to bounce back and re-engage? Or is this telling me that this organization is kind of very subtly, but nonetheless telling me this ain't for you?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. And we have to take those signs. Because again, no one ever comes out and says, we're never going to put you in a leadership role because you're black or you're, Latinx or anything. They're not going to tell you that, well, there's probably actually a couple places that would tell you. But
you can find out somewhere.
They won't be that explicit about it. Right. But very subtly, there'll be these things of, well, you're not ready yet. Or we often use, we don't know if you're the right fit for that role, which I think is often an implicit bias proxy for you might not be the right color, the right gender, whatever. I'm just keeping it real there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think part of it's asking yourself the question then, is it subtly telling me that this, maybe it's not my expiration date has arrived, but I've kind of reached the end of where I'm going to be able to go here, and it's time for me to look for that next thing. I mean, it might not be that, but I think just ask yourself that question and be honest with yourself when it comes to that answer. It might be time to move on to the next thing after that.
Okay. Greg, I can't ask you any more questions. You spent a lot of time.
I talk too much for every question. You have to put a timer down there so I can see it counting down.
No, we've had your answers have led to, some truly great nuggets. And if you could share one last thought, so let's think about that person that may be thinking about his or her own career development, and they're like, Greg, but what about me? Like, what sort of last thought would you share about career development to that person?
I'm going to steal a quote from a friend. So I have a friend that moved here from Benin, country in West Africa. And when he moved here, the only person he knew in all the United States was his brother. And it was interesting to me because here we have an aversion to even going to the movies by ourselves, right? Like, you're going to be there, right? And here he switched continents, countries, languages, governments. I mean, really big move. And I said, how do you reach a point where you decide you're going to do this? And what's the tipping point where you say, yes, I'm going to do this, especially right in this current context, right? And I'll never forget this. He said to me, I did it because I know that the future is based on what I do today.
Oh,
right.
Oh man.
He
I'm gonna
said,
write that down.
I'm not worried about my future. He says, I know that whatever happens then is based on what I'm doing right now. So if I do the right things now, the future's going to take care of itself. And that has just always stuck with me. So that would be my last piece of advice is your future, my future, our future is based on what we do right now. So the question is, what do I want to do today?
That's it. Yes, that and what a great way of closing this out. So, what are you up to over there? What do you have going on in your world? And where can anyone who listens to this find you if they want to connect?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So if you want to check out my website, it's at gregorytall.com. That's GregoryTall.com. That's where you can find information about all the interactive learning experiences I do. So I go around and I help people become better communicators. So I do workshops and everything from giving feedback to giving kick butt presentations that will wow your stakeholders, your employees, your bosses. So that's the work I do. You can find me online there. On Twitter at Gregory Tall. What else is there? LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. My blog. I'm going to call it a blog project because I'm not writing consistently enough yet to call it a true blog. But if you really want to check it out, it's Tall Tales Blog. Tall Tales. TALLTELLBLOGS.com. You can find me online there. And then, I'm just kind of on the road. So I have actually a pretty busy quarter coming up. Be traveling all over doing different kinds of workshops. My unconscious bias workshop has been hugely popular. So I'm doing lots of that. Unfortunately, I did not have a public workshop on the books just yet. It's open to everyone. These are all private engagements. But if I do have one coming up, I will certainly let you know. And I invite people, if you're in Chicagoland, swing on by.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that I have all the links in the description so that people can find you there as well too. So I want to close things out with our flash questions. And I ask these same questions to all of our guests. I'll ask them to you. So I'll put the question out there. You finish the sentence, 3 of them, no pressure. You ready?
No pressure.
Okay. So question number 1, it's never too late to
learn.
Okay. Question number 2, I get inspired by.
Oh, talk about the person, the thing. Provocateurs.
Oh, I get that. Number 3, career success means.
Oh, wow. These are really hard to fit. Career success means oh, that's so hard. I feel like I'm freezing up now. I had all these great answers before I saw it. Now I'm like, what? I think it means being proud of the impact you make. It's probably
That's awesome. So you freeze up and you still come out with these wise nuggets.
Yeah. That's what it is for me.
No, that's awesome. So, Greg, I appreciate you. Thank you for being on the But What About Me podcast.
Thank you for having me. Have a great weekend.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Be sure to tune in next week because we have so much more in store for you. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and keep glowing.